NSFW. What's the worst thing that's happened at your family gathering? Proposed to my girlfriend at my birthday party and she said no, then told me she had been cheating on me. This was post cake. My alcoholic uncle got so drunk at his own daughter's wedding that he pissed on the wedding cake in front of half the wedding party. He quit drinking after that. Was celebrating an uncle's birthday and we realized about 15 minutes into it that grandma died. Everyone lost their mind. Because she was 75 and seemed fine 10 minutes before. Died of massive brain aneurysm. Whole family was devastated. I still took some cake. Introduced to a distant cousin for the first time who was a 10. She was beautiful, and I was told that she was deaf. I had never met a deaf person. We were both 15 years old. I shook her hand and said to my brother who was standing next to me, "She is a babe." She started to laugh. "I read lips," she said. Edit. Clarification. My grandmother tried to shoot herself in the front yard because my mother wouldn't let me and my siblings, 6, 4 and 2, ride sitting on the back hood of my uncle's classic convertible during their neighborhood 4th of July parade. She was angry that no one would be able to see our outfits if we were seated inside the car, and while trying to shoot herself accidentally grazed my grandpa in the process. Good times. Edit. It's called a trunk. THX guys. This didn't happen to me. But I watched it happen and it was awful. My cousin was pregnant from a guy who she had only been dating for a few months. But he was a good guy. On Christmas Eve she invited him to our family gathering, and when we were exchanging presents he grabbed a small box from the tree and was 2 seconds from getting down on one knee when that uncle jokingly says, "God, I hope you're not proposing." Everyone laughs and this poor guy is in a half bent knee half standing pose and just looks up at that uncle and slowly powers through it and slowly gets down on one knee and proceeds to ask her if she'll marry him. She said yes and they're engaged, but it was one of the worst 45 seconds of my life. Our worst family story happened at my aunt's wedding. My aunt, a white lady, was marrying a Korean American man whose parents really wanted him to marry a Korean woman. During their entire engagement, his parents would invite random Korean women over for dinner to try and sway him. Eventually, they seemed to get over the fact that he was definitely going to be marrying a white girl. On the wedding day, his parents seemed politely resigned to the situation. His father actually even danced with my aunt at the reception. So we were all relieved. After dancing, his father approached the mic, and we all expected him to give a toast about how my aunt was so great that he overcame his prejudices or something. Instead, he said, in his thick Korean accent, "This is abomination." Like German Shepherd mating with poodle, my aunt ran out of the room crying. And my grandfather casually walked up and punched him in the face. In front of 200 wedding guests. People cheered. My 60-year-old aunt showed me her new boobies and told me she'd take my V card and show me what good pussy feels like. She did this at the dinner table. My coolest grandparent had a seizure. I was in late high school at the time and had to take all the little kids upstairs and distract them while everyone else waited for the ambulance, etc. I remember trying to teach them to count to 10 in Japanese because I'd just learned in school and it was the only thing I could think to pass the time. My favorite uncle was an early casualty of the AIDS epidemic. He was gay, and out long before it was in any way acceptable. Think small southern town. Late 80s. At his funeral, my grandmother was telling everyone he was a junkie that shared needles. Just to avoid admitting he was gay to her church friends. As if that were a more respectable way to have gotten the virus. Aunts, uncles and dads start arguing over my grandfather's possessions after his passing in his house after his funeral. Lots of yelling. Pushing. Get the duck outs that day. Eventually pulled my dad out of the house in an effort to save the family. They never recovered. My uncle passed away without ever speaking with my dad again. And the others speak a bit to each other, but we haven't had any family events. It's been 3 years. Thanksgiving about 1985. Family gathering at my parents' home. Mom, dad, brother, sister, grandmas, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. All watching football. Cousin picks up the remote to mess with the volume, but turns on the VCR on accident. Full blown porno fills the screen. Dad leaps, grabs the remote and fumbles frantically to turn it off. Bible thumper brother and sister-in-law snatch up their kids and leave. Cousin says, "Boy, that sudden death can really get intense." We had a huge family dinner at a very fancy restaurant. My great aunt decided to move a very fancy pot of flowers with some peacock feathers stuck in it out of the way. In this case, out of the way meant right above the candles. It turns out peacock feathers burn incredibly fast and produce a lot of smoke. The whole restaurant had to be evacuated. To be honest, it wasn't really that bad. The dinner had been incredibly boring. 14-year-old me certainly thought the fire made things more interesting. My brother throwing a temper tantrum at age 30. It has been pretty common for him to blow up about little all his life. It was his youngest daughter's second birthday and he was in a ratty mood all day even though our mom and his wife had taken care of everything. It came to a head when it was about time to do the cake. It was a kind of tall cake with a carousel on the top. The dog bumped into the table and the cake shifted a little, almost knocking the carousel over. He stood up and said something like, "God damn it. Your ducking dog is ruining everything." My mom said, "Calm down. The cake is fine." He got in her face and said, "Don't tell me what to do, itch." At that point my brother and stepdad got up and kind of surrounded him ready to kick his ass. After a few seconds he finally stormed out of the house and left. I feel the need to reiterate at this point that he was 30 years old and it was his daughter's second birthday. TLDR, my brother's 2-year-old daughter was more mature than my brother. I found out it was a family gathering. You mean I'm related to all these racist hillbillies? Well, one of my aunts found out her husband was cheating on her with a 22-year-old Chinese econ student. He was 63 at the time, so there's that. My stepmom never got along with her sister-in-law, brother's wife. They got into a fist fight one Thanksgiving at my grandparents' house. Grandma got mad and called the police. My dad was a police officer at the time. Guess who showed up to arrest his wife and sister-in-law? Relatives showing off their weird-looking baby and people trying to not say anything awful about it. Being one of the first to greet them, and thus having no warning. All I could come up with was, "Oh, that's a baby." I guess no blood was spilled but I felt like dirt afterwards. Christmas at my auntie's house with my whole extended family on my dad's side, and their pets. In particular these two dogs, one of which was very fond of the other. And this dog decided he wanted to have his way with the smaller, uninterested dog. Long story short, the large dog came all over the kitchen floor, leaving a huge mess that we had to clean up before eating our dinner. Oh, I have one. This happened like a week ago, at a little get-together of family at my house. My brother-in-law and his wife got into a huge argument about their new baby's medical care. The little one had a terrible case of psoriasis, and he blamed his wife for not staying on top of it, causing it to bleed. During this shouting match, Bill declared that if he was going to be raising some other man's baby, he was going to be calling the ducking shots from then on. They have been married for 10 years and have 2 other girls. We were also mortified. We left my house. 10 other people got into cars and went to the park. Quick edit. This was my husband's brother and his wife. My dad got married again when I was 22. I used this excuse to start drinking at 9 AM. Needless to say, at around 1 or 2 the next morning I am so ducked up and ready for bed. I don't remember making it back to my dad's house. I lived in the basement apartment. Apparently after getting home I proceeded to strip off all my clothes and get into my dad and his new wife's bed. Everyone else is still partying until late and finally the happy couple decide they've had enough and want to retire to their bed. Stepmom comes in and finds me passed out, so she figures she'll wake me up by stripping the blankets off me. Boy, was she surprised as naked me gets up and belligerently yells at her for waking me up. I then argue that it's my bed and I go to get something to drink in the kitchen. Another 20 of my relatives get the pleasure of taking in my naked ass. With some coaxing they manage to get me and some clothes into my own bed. I wake up 6 hours later with no recollection of the night's events. Edit. I'm a guy. And hooking up with my stepmother would not be an option. Not happening. Not enough booze in the world to make that woman attractive. Edit 2. Wow, my top comment is about my family seeing my D. Stay classy Reddit. Brother brings girl home from Asia. After dinner entire family gets completely wasted. Brother and girlfriend get into huge fight and brother buffs in the bathroom sink. The next morning I walk into my parents' house and they're making breakfast. The first thought on my mind was, thank God it wasn't me this time. Christmas dinner. Grandpa picked up something at the store that wasn't what Grandma asked for. Grandma threw frozen chicken at Grandpa's head. Grandpa ducked. Chicken hit glass patio door, shattering it. Police were called. Children were quickly taken and driven home. And Grandma wonders why most of the family doesn't make much of an effort to stay in touch. I luckily missed this Christmas cause me and my mom and dad were in Disney. My great grandma had a dog. Can't recall what it was but it was super small. Since before I was born. Well, one Christmas everyone is eating in the kitchen with a clear view of the dog in the back ears. In the middle of Christmas dinner a big Doberman came into the backyard and ripped the little dog's throat out. Kind of ruined Christmas. I'm kind of late to the thread so this will probably get buried. But at my dad's funeral, his mistress showed up and sat right behind my mom, my brothers, and I. She then began to sing loudly to the music that was playing during the slidder show, followed by her giving a speech about how my dad was her first love, and various bullet. My mom spent a few voluntary days at a mental institution after that. The woman was seen drinking 40 ounces in the parking lot after the service. A friend of mine who wasn't ever good with the ladies one day showed up with this really awesome chick. They hit it off right away and it was like a match made in heaven. Then, they went to go to his mom and stepdad's house to have dinner where he was going to introduce his girlfriend to them. His mother was horrified when she walked in. Why? Because this girl was his sister and they had been separated at birth. The mother kept the son and the father kept the little girl. Ducked up thing as they stayed together for about 2 years after this. Continued to have a 6. And acted like nothing was wrong with it. About 12 years ago we were all at my uncle's house. Me, my siblings, parents, grandparents, and obviously my aunt and uncle. Grandpa was drinking some coffee with dessert when it went down the wrong pipe and he choked up a bit. My mom, being one of the biggest overreactors I've ever known, assumes he's having another heart attack. He has a history of heart trouble and flips the duck out. When my aunt tried to intervene and say that he wasn't having a heart attack and only coughing because of the coffee, they got into a screaming and shoving fight. Eventually my uncle just goes, get the duck out of my house. Get the duck out now. 10 minutes later we're all in the car and out of there. Up until last year they cut off all contact with my aunt and uncle and fairly recently they've talked to them, added them on Facebook, invited them to events, etc. We gathered at my grandma's house, where my mom and all her sisters had been raised. My oldest aunt had done a bunch of dodgy stuff to glom all the estate and the sisters had come in force with their husbands and kids to try to talk sense into her. It did not work. They should have lawyered up, but this was the 60s. Hell, I don't know why they were all so weak. All of us cousins had been kicked outside while the grown-ups argued. I was just a little kid and I went in to get a glass of water. She had put locks on the cupboard. Mean aunt came in and slapped me across the face so hard I was staggered. I did not get water. One of my older cousins found me crying and took me to town, riding on his shoulders part of the way to buy me a soda at the drugstore and a few toys. Many years later my mom told me mean aunt most likely poisoned grandma. And it seems true. My grandmother had a heart attack after Thanksgiving dinner. She lived. Went to a family reunion in the holler of Kentucky with folks I thought I knew. It was my cousin's or great uncle's house. I'm not too sure. And he is 80 plus years old and his family has owned this land forever. Everyone, except for my immediate family, was very close to them. So some like 12-year-old girl in my family, who is white, brings over a black girl. Everything was fine and dandy till one of the owners saw this. He yelled at the top of his lungs, "What the duck is this it? Insert hick name here. Didn't build this land to have niggers on it. It ain't right." That little girl will never forget that. She had to deal with real racism right in her face and I was so embarrassed for being a part of that family and felt that I had to apologize for being associated. We left very quickly after. Thanksgiving back in 1998. I was 8 years old and my wealthy grandparents decided to take the whole family to Maui for the week. This included our 5-person family and around 15 extended family members. All was great until Thanksgiving dinner. My older cousin started bickering, which turned into a pretty big altercation and some food throwing. 8-year-old me out is loving it until the uncles get involved. My 18-year-old male cousin, who was a total asswipe, starts freaking out at my 15-year-old female cousin, calling her a whore for reasons unbeknownst to me. At this point, female cousin's dad comes flying over and punches his nephew so hard that literally is thrown a few feet and nearly knocked out. Now the other uncle has to defend his son, which results in a few punches between those two until my family can separate them. There will never be a better Thanksgiving dinner, and my grandparents will never take us anywhere again. With an ex at a family gathering, maybe Thanksgiving, everyone decided to take that year's family picture around the big tractor my ex's dad owned. This thing had all sorts of attachments, including a pretty large backhoe bucket. Dad turns it on, raises the bucket a bit for the elder members of the family to sit on, then turns it off. The little kids pile up in the cab of the tractor. One of the ex's uncles had adopted this little girl who was weird. She decided to start fiddling with the controls of the tractor. Now, the tractor is turned off, but apparently the controls could still release the hydraulics. So down goes the bucket with grandma and grandpa sitting on it. Everyone starts screaming. Grandma is quick enough to get away, but not grandpa. Kid pulls the controls the other way, thinking the bucket will lift, but it just keeps going down and pins grandpa's legs under it. Everyone is screaming, but kind of frozen until I nudge the ex-boyfriend and he turns the